Interesting because this is a math ed talk. Maybe most of these folks are mathematicians.
So leave it on until Eric's done.
Yeah, this place is different.
Yeah, just stick that in my office when you're done. We're good. It's live. I gotta go.
You well, my friend.
Glad I showed up at least long enough to make your life.
I really appreciate that too. Yeah. Karma. Karma was watching.
So I think we're ready to get started. It's a little after 3. We're very fortunate today to have a great guest with us. Holt Wilson comes to us from visiting from UNC Greensboro, so not too far away, but he also got his undergraduate degree in East Carolina and then drifted his way west to NC State to get his PhD in mathematics education, and then drifted farther west to UNC Greensboro. Who knows where he'll end up? Eventually, retiring in somewhere on the West Coast. But we're very happy to have him here. He's been involved very heavily across the state for a long time in mathematics education issues, and I think he's going to share some of that insight with us today.
Thank you. So who's in the room? Faculty, okay, grad students, prospective teachers. Thank you for coming. I recognize that it is Friday at 3 before a long weekend, so I appreciate you you showing up, and I hope that it's useful and meaningful. And if any time it's not, stop and I can do something else. It was pretty difficult to think about what would be useful and engaging at this about this project without spending 5 hours to talk about it. So if I skip some steps, if you're unclear, just please stop me at any time. I'd like for this to be sort of informal conversation. So I did want to start by saying that there are many, many people who could be giving this talk. In fact, there's over 400 math educators across the state that have been integrally involved in this work. And so all of these are names of people that have either designed stuff, checked stuff, used it and given us feedback, participated in presentations. So these are all unique names, I promise. We've also partnered with different organizations, and I did want to give a special thank you to the department and the College of Arts and Sciences for supporting some of the work this past summer that Katie and Travis sort of spearheaded up here. So thank you for that. See, I told you they aren't repeats. And so here's sort of the university crowd that's working with this and our colleagues at the Department of Public Instruction. And again, this is a lot of people's work, and so one of the things that comes with that is I'm not in charge of it all. So I'm not in charge of the text on the website, for instance. That took me a while to get over, that I don't talk and write like that. But many of the graphics today will have been generated by lots of people, and with the scope of the work, it has to be that way. And also I think it's important because, again, it's not one of our work. It's not even the university's work. It's the community in our state. I want to start with a question. So if you believe that it's out there already, where does the knowledge needed to improve pre-K-12 mathematics teaching and learning reside? Where is it? And if you don't think we know it yet, where might it come from? So turn and talk for a second. Somebody's got to know how to fix this big problem we've got. Where's it going to come from? Who's going to solve it? Yeah. This is not a mathematical problem, right? Flop question number 1. So there's some interesting conversations going on How many of you said teachers? Okay. That's my best bet. But when I consider everything they have to do, I worry that that'll never happen. They have less and less math teaching time and more everything else time these days. And then I think some about where would new ideas come from. PLCs are great, but at some point it becomes an echo chamber, right? So where do those ideas come from? Are you going to push back?
No, we just think it shouldn't come from politicians.
I'm being live streamed, so I have to be really careful. But I would agree with you. So how about sort of leaders in education, principals, district folks? Nobody? Good. How about policymakers, legislators? No. Us? Yeah. Maybe we, at least at some point in our careers, we've believed that we could, right?
If there's a close relationship between the two.
Now you're getting there, right? So some people would say families and communities, governmental agencies outside of just education, because more and more we learn about learning, we know that all of the other stuff that doesn't happen in a classroom really matters. You might say nonprofits, if you've given up on government altogether, or even private industry. More and more of that every day. But I want to make an observation that for a really long time, all of these groups have been working on this problem. And none of us have really made any meaningful impact on what I view as immoral. So this is the NAEP math, I think it's 8th grade, since 1990, and this is the achievement gap, better known as the opportunity gap. And we can't seem to do a thing about it in education. And so how does this usually work? So politicians and their people create a policy, something about education. It's been standards a lot recently. And then they sort of give it to the bureaucrats. Bureaucrats sort of oversee its implementation. They pass it to the districts, who then get a plan together. They pass it to the schools, and then they give it to the teachers, and we repeat. Give it 3 or 4 years, and that didn't work, so we go to something else. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I don't understand this graphic. It's just showing the difference between math achievement.
So this is white students' math achievement, and this is non-white students' math achievement.
Grade 8 and grade 4.
Oh, you're right. I was pulling the graphics at the beginning. This is at grade 8 for the NAEP, and this is at grade 4. And so this is not the one that shows race, is it?
No.
It looks the same. It really does, which is why I pulled it quickly. I apologize. So they pass it along, and then the teachers are left to implement this thing, and students continue to have these differences in performance. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is sort of the history of that and how it's evolved over the last 30 to 40 years, and what we've learned about it. We've learned a great deal. And then I wanted to jump to North Carolina in the last 10 years, which has been an interesting show if you have been watching, particularly in Raleigh. And then, so I wanted to think about, is there a different way that we can work on improving teaching and learning that's not hierarchical and siloed specialization, pushing things down with more and more pressure, I would add, to teachers. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about what this group has been working on the past 3 years. And I'm going to try to give you some evidence of why I think it's at least something worth continuing to explore. And I don't think we're going to have time for me to have any closing thoughts, but if we get there, great. So what have we learned? All the way back to A Nation at Risk, there's been rising public interest and outcry from some sectors about improving schooling, particularly in math. So in the 80s or late 80s, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics was the first professional organization to have educational standards. They implemented those, and the math wars ensued. So in North Carolina, we had 2 standard courses of study. I think, Debbie, Betty, do you guys remember?
We were just children then.
That's right, I forget. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I think there were 2 that sort of followed that. And then in 2000, the Principles Standards for School Mathematics came out. It was a revision of the first document, almost in response to a lot of the misunderstandings about the first document. No Child Left Behind came through, and then we have the era of accountability. So over time, we had this progressive, kids learn deeper mathematics and with understanding, pushing back on basics, back and forth. And sort of what we've learned from research during those periods is in the first wave in the 90s, it really didn't do a thing. It didn't affect what was taught. It didn't affect test scores. There was no, it just didn't work. But the research was pretty clear that teachers did not have the opportunities they needed to learn to implement those standards with any fidelity, any meaning, in ways that were meaningful. The second wave, we actually were able to affect what happened in classes, but it wasn't for the good. They, with accountability came testing, and that became the focus of what teachers do. And there were incentives and sanctions, and another line of research has pointed out the impossible situations that educators are put in meeting these competing demands, and so power dynamics came into that. So sort of together, the influence of national and state policy on instruction, it does depend on the opportunities teachers have to learn. And we need to carefully pay attention to the power dynamics that are produced and challenged by those different initiatives. The other thing that we learned was that local implementation, the degree to which that is successful is largely dependent upon how well the resources that the teachers have, the opportunities they have to learn, the textbooks, the tests, all of that is aligned and sends the same message. And so over here I've got sort of this graphic of sort of the big features that policymakers say or policy researchers suggest that we work on aligning, which is standards, curriculum, instruction, assessment, teacher evaluation, and professional development. What's interesting about that is in a local control state like ours, the State Department's in charge of some things, and then the 115 school districts are in charge of the other things. And so right there you introduce lots of interpretation, lots of variability, and that variability is largely dependent on the resources of the district. So you have larger districts that are well-resourced, have one set of tools at their disposal for alignment, and rural districts, small districts, do not have those. So coming out of that era, there's with the science generation, next generation science standards, there's a lot of talk right now in that arena about coherence. Horizontal coherence being sort of these things. Does all of the components of the system work well? Vertical coherence being teachers, principals, district folks, all the way up the system. They all agree on what the standards or the initiative or the innovation, whatever it is calling for them to do. But then developmental, so is it appropriate for students to learn this topic based on what they learned the year before? There's also conversation about alignment isn't even enough. It doesn't matter the extent to which we believe it's aligned. If teachers don't see it as aligning, then it's not aligned. So they're calling that coherence, and coherence is a process of crafting an understanding of how all this works together. And the last is the sort of the realization that adaptation is always going to happen, and it actually needs to happen locally. Rather than trying to adaptation-proof whatever it is, we actually should embrace that and think about how to make those adaptations productive rather than what they call lethal mutations. So we've learned about all of that, and sort of the summary of it is implementation researchers, that was in education. People in implementation science have been looking at this, and in the beginning of the 70s, this started when they began to realize that when they would create something, a curriculum or some innovation, that it didn't work out the way they thought it would. And it's pretty obvious to us now, but at the time it was not. So the Rand did a really big study, and they started saying, yeah, this is not going to work. Like, implementation matters, and how people make sense of that affects the degree to which it was successful. So the early research focused on like the characteristics of the innovation, how well people could look at it, how did they recognize it, could they use it easily. And then they blamed, when it didn't work, on the people trying to implement it. They didn't have the capacity to do so, or the policy was ambiguous, things like that. Recently, though, we've kind of come to realize it's less about that, and it's more about understanding when you implement something, when it works, for whom, where, what are the processes and the conditions under which it worked. And so the explanations for some of the difficulties in bringing about large-scale change, my favorite is sort of the seeing the familiar in the new. And we do that in North Carolina. We get new standards, and 2 weeks later, we ask teachers to write test items. And so they look at a standard and they say, oh, it's the same thing. So we have a test now driving the next cycle, but it's really on the old set of standards. So there's some really interesting social problems wrapped up into this, this movement of reform in education. I like to think about it as a compliance problem. Like, people wouldn't do what I wanted them to do, to people don't have the chance to learn and to make sense of that. And not just people, but organizations don't have the chance to learn what's expected of them. So that was the background. That was the boring part, I hope. So in North Carolina since then, we had the Common Core state standards in 2010. I think they were released in the end of June, and 3 days later, something really crazy, we mass adopted in North Carolina. For full implementation, not staggered, it was full on, and 2 years later. That didn't go so well. And if any of you know any teachers at the time, that was a horrible, dark period for all of us. People staying up all night looking for things, parents crying, kids going crazy. It was bad. So much so that 2 years later, we had a legislatively appointed commission to review that. Never mind, we had a whole Department of Public Instruction that did that work. We had this other group doing it. The state board did not accept their report, thanks to some of the people in this room, actually. The leaders from NCCTM, the North Carolina Council of Teachers of Mathematics, AMTE, got together and wrote letters in opposition of the report, and the state board did not take it, which was a good thing. We were going to do Minnesota standards, I believe. It was not good. But that did give us reason to begin to work on some of the problems that were with the Common Core. And so this is sort of where we're going to jump in. But I did want to put up some of the names of these pieces of legislation for you to sort of see. This is my favorite one. A bill to be entitled an act to enact to actually get rid of the Common Core Act. So that one didn't make it, but it's still going on. So last week, this was an email sent to every teacher, well, teachers on the listserv across North Carolina on the first day of school for most of them. So there's a lot of things to say about that. Most of them probably not appropriate for this talk.
Who did that come from?
The state superintendent. Yeah. But we're going to jump into this work right here. So the story starts here with the revision of the high school standards, the first 3 courses. And so because DPI acknowledged that the Common Core implementation was a bust, there was a lot of interest and will from the leadership in thinking about implementing standards in a different way. And so Katie Mwini was on that group as well, and I was invited to write. Debbie, you reviewed. So we went through this process, and while we were doing so, there was this sentiment of like, we're not going to do that again to teachers. We're not going to do that again to ourselves. We want to do something different, which sort of fit with what DPI was looking for. And so they asked us to do it, and we sort of got together and agreed to think about this in a different way. So a research practice partnership is where practitioners and researchers work together on the problems that face the practitioner in their work. So focused on problems of practice. And so in education, there's been a lot of work in the last 15 years around them, and they're showing promise in leading to design innovations, interventions that actually help kids learn and address this problem that I alluded to at the beginning. So I'm going to let actually the people, not me, if this will work, tell you a little bit about it.
Beneficial to teachers because it leverages the strengths of each individual for the benefit of all.
Can you hear it?
Collaboration is how we often deal with the most difficult problems that we face.
Collaboration is important because it allows us as educators to collaborate around student achievement, which is the ultimate goal of education.
It shouldn't matter where a student in North Carolina is sitting, whether it be Asheville or Greensboro or Raleigh. They deserve the same opportunity to learn mathematics.
The North Carolina Collaborative for Mathematics Learning is a research practice partnership with the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and universities and school districts across the state of North Carolina. The overarching goal of our partnership is to create a network where state and district math leaders, teachers, and teacher educators can come together to support mathematics education in our state. Let's take a brief look at some exciting resources and tools this partnership is co-designing to support mathematics education in North Carolina.
I really like the tasks and the modules because they provided me with real-world applications that are fun and engaging for the teacher and the students. They can be easily altered and adjusted to meet the needs of my learners. They also serve as good models from which I can attempt to create, plan, and deliver instructional tasks.
Student work and discussions around the task are really nice to help me feel more confident and prepared as I introduce the new task to my students. Seeing how other teachers implemented the task and how they responded to student work is very helpful.
So when I look at the standards and compare what's going on in Unit 1 versus Unit 4,
I think the focus of the standard is for students to understand and come up with a mathematical justification for
that is a major part of Math 1 is to understand the difference between linear and exponential.
It is important that by creating this equity and access for teachers across the state of North Carolina, that every student is receiving high quality instruction in every single classroom.
This is about it.
I can imagine using the Canvas modules in lots of different ways. While the Canvas space is designed to be a safe space for teachers to collaborate, content, pedagogy, and other briefs are being developed to support other stakeholders in the North Carolina mathematics education community, such as teacher leaders, coaches, administrators, and district level personnel.
So it keeps going. So that was a brief sort of overview of all of these teachers and district leaders across the state working together to develop resources, and it came about because the new standards were adopted in June to be implemented 6 weeks later with the school districts that started early in late July. And most of the district curriculum specialists for math are 9-month employees, so they were gone for the summer. And so they were going to come back and have brand new standards that were going that year. And so they actually got together and created, began creating these resources to share, and so joined with us. And I'll share a little bit more about the different things that we've designed and give you some sort of evidence of how that they're effective and the ways in which they're working. So this is probably boring. This is how we're organizing our work. We're using something called, design-based implementation research, which is a way of thinking about designing processes and materials and resources while something is being implemented to make sure it's successful. So we are focused on a shared problem of practice, like the research practice partnership, but we're really focused on getting research evidence in use in practice. So research on how kids learn, research on teaching, which are better pedagogical practices for having kids learn math deeply. Another key component of it is this collaborative design. So we don't design as university faculty and give it, and then they tell us how it goes. We actually involve them in the whole process, and in fact, many times just hold on and let them go. We also are committed to research, so trying to build some knowledge around making this better, and then it attends to sort of issues of scale and sustainability, whereas typically when we design something in education research, it works in a lab. It works in one classroom or sort of a hothouse for innovation, but we have a difficult time sort of moving beyond that and getting the same benefits at scale. And so what we try to do is think about that throughout the whole process rather than at the end thinking about how to scale this up. This is a sort of a timeline of what we've worked on, and so I don't know how familiar you are. We typically do standards as math, and we do one revision, and we have 5 to 7 years in North Carolina before we do it again. Because of the political landscape might be the way to put that, we've done it in 3 different tracks. So the first was the Math 1 through 3 that I mentioned earlier. A year later, the kindergarten through 8th grade standards were revised, and then the 4th level courses, which last week Katie and Travis talked to you about. So our goals with this were, first was to develop a shared vision of instruction, and that's important because if we think about what we've learned about implementation research, it's the mixed messages and the multiple interpretations that makes things not work. And so a good example of this is, I have a friend that was teaching beginning rate of change. Matchbox cars, the little, little tracks that they go on, rolling them down and measuring. The principal said, I'll come back when you're teaching for your observation. So she was, rightfully so, she was mortified because she was a beginning teacher. But it was a really good lesson, but that's not what the teacher or the principal thought teaching was, so he was going to come back when they were doing something else. And so if you're trying to change a system, you're trying to change the ways in which kids experience math, but the person observing you and evaluating you doesn't have the same image of what it should look like as you do as a teacher, it's not going to work. You're never going to change that system. So one of our goals was to work collectively to build a shared understanding of what high-quality math instruction looks like. And then the second, again, I've already mentioned, was a real commitment to sharing what we have learned from research for teachers and decision makers across the system to use. And we did so by working on designing resources, both that share that research and then embody that vision. And we worked on practices like collaborating, working across traditional organizational boundaries. So it was a shock to me that small district here, next door district, they don't share resources, they don't share anything. In fact, everything is very protected, and that's just a culture. So we worked really hard on acknowledging, I have a lot of resources. My colleague next door does not have any resources. That's not fair to their kids. And so we've worked hard at promoting a culture of sharing, I guess is the way to put it. Another is to really work on some of the structures that make all this thing work. Communication is a real issue. Email is going to kill us all, I'm afraid. But in education, an email from the State Department will go to the districts who might decide to forward it along today. They might 3 weeks from now send it. And so the teachers that are that we were designing all these things for came to us, I guess it was after the first year, and had never heard of anything that we had been working on. So we've been working on Twitter communication and notions of what professional development should look like. And I can talk about that at length later if you're interested. So we had some principles that we sort of adhered to guide the design. Again, sort of what professional development should be and shouldn't be. If we want teachers to teach actively, actively engage their students, then we shouldn't stand and deliver ourselves as teacher educators. Let's see. So I was going to share with you what we've learned across these cycles. And I told you to stop me if you were bored or you wanted to do something else, right? Okay. So one of the things that we were able to do was to create professional learning modules online. Not a huge, I shouldn't say that. I've yet to be convinced that I am a good person to teach online in an effective way. But when you have one math teacher in Perquimans County, way out east, that has not had professional development in 3 years, like there's motivation there to figure out how to do this stuff. So we have this Canvas course that all of the high school teachers in North Carolina were enrolled in, over 5,000 of them. And we, as the school year started, we would focus on what was coming up for them. So it was almost like just in time, here's what's different about this, this unit. So within that, we put all of the tools that everybody was creating, because one of the things we learned in Common Core was giving teachers a list of 50 websites that have stuff on it really wasn't helpful. It has sort of the same effect of not giving them as not giving them anything. They were overloaded. They didn't have time to sift through that. So our goal was to have like a one-stop shop place, and we were successful for a while with that. Let's see. Another thing a decision that we made was the political environment at the time. We were afraid to ask teachers to share what they didn't understand about something publicly. And so we closed the space down and wouldn't let supervisors in, which caused some issues when the principal wanted to see what their teachers were doing. But it was really important to the teachers to have a place to say, I really don't understand this, before they had taught it. So we've managed to be able to keep that, actually, surprisingly. And then, let's see, so within those, part of the modules were focused on the content. And so here's an example of a linear function unit. Within those, we had student work samples, so being able to think about what your kids might do before you teach the lesson, some of the research behind it, why it's important. So different instructional resources to do that, so algebra tiles, videos of that. We had standards writers. You name it, these guys wanted to put it in these modules, and so we did. And then we wanted them to have something to take away. So here's an example of one of the research and practice briefs that we worked on creating. Another type of module or professional learning experience for the teachers was around pedagogy. And so we had, so this is Kara Jackson, she's a researcher. We had people like video in, and like the researcher who came up with the ideas talk to the teachers of North Carolina. So again, some more about the kinds of things that you would want your students to be engaged in if they're developing deep understanding. And then some nice frameworks or takeaway tools, teaching tools to think about, like, how can I assess a task quickly? What are some good questions I can pose that I don't have to like take this big long sheet with me? So we were also thinking about, when you leave this module, how are you going to take this with you? And then again, thinking about vision, we're always trying to embody high quality instruction because we're trying to generate that shared meaning. So let's see. So this is one of the briefs. They can't get enough of these, and they're really, really difficult to write. You would think that 2 pages would be nothing, like really easy to just distill research, but there's so much out there. It really takes a long time to write them, and they want one on everything. I think we're at 45 or so now at this point, and like we have a huge list of requests. So if anybody wants to write one, from math to teaching to helping with homework, I'm your guy. Talk to me. I will help you get a topic and give you the template. So within the content-focused ones, it was sort of what are the big ideas of this unit, and how do they connect to what kids learned before and what they're going to learn later. Katie was really instrumental in helping us think about high school. What was the significant mathematics of that? I encourage you to look at some of them. They're really good. And one of the things we tried to do in everything was a set of discussion starters. So we really believe that cross-role collaboration and cross-role learning is important in this. You learn different from somebody that doesn't do your job. You learn from people that do your job. So teachers, working with teachers is great, but there's something different about talking to someone at DPI, for instance. I learned a ton from those guys. So we were trying to recreate that experience with these by giving ways that teachers could connect with parents, they could connect with their principal, and so forth. That was the first year. We learned that it's really hard and we're tired and we have a lot to go. So in the second year, K-8 was exponentially bigger. And so we created some partnerships and for the resource development, and then thought about what's the piece that can pull all this together. We had a pacing guide, for lack of a better term, for the high school, but we really used it just to organize all the materials. These guys in K-8, I think it was over 75 districts participated in grouping standards, clustering them, ordering them, and then getting feedback, revising it. They did that 4 times. And it ended up that one of the large assessment projects of DPI actually followed that, which is probably not a big deal to most people, but in education, for the teachers to actually create something that drives testing is I've never heard of it before. It was a really, it was a good moment for the state. And so these frameworks are still being used by, the number changes, but it's well over 80% of the districts in North Carolina. All the teachers are following this, which allows them to talk, not just within their school, but across districts about what students are doing in a way that's sort of relevant to the time. But we also tried to work on making that a professional learning tool. And again, this whole idea of vision being a part of that in the descriptions and the math that was important. And these are examples of what they look like. And so from that, we learned that having a tool outside of the DPI school district sort of hierarchy really worked, because DPI can't say anything about curriculum. Remember, like sort of they do this and districts do that. Districts need that, and they can't get it. So having this outside third party that's sort of it represents all the different facets of math education in the state, there's a lot of buy-in behind it. And so the frameworks became the thing that professional development was organized around instructional materials. And so we actually almost sort of achieved that alignment that really wasn't possible, and it was a fluke. But so it was so successful that last week Katie and Travis talked to you about we're going to try it again for the 4th level courses, because there's a power, I don't want to say this, there's an economy of scale when everybody's working on the same thing at the same time, which was one of the promises of Common Core that I'm afraid we've lost for a generation. So teachers are working on things and sharing them and learning in the process. They're learning from not only their students, but students in another district. And so I wanted to share some of why I think it's a good idea, but I'm looking at time.
You're good on time. You got 20 minutes.
Thank you. Good. Okay, so just some by the numbers. I pulled these right before I came. We have a website that's kind of housing all this stuff. We've got 50,000 repeat visitors in the last year and a half, I think is when it went up. 107,000 sessions, page views per session. It's not very deep, so we think this is a pretty good sign. These are the top 25 districts, or cities, I should say, the Google Analytics tracks. You can't read them, I know, but they're the usual suspects like the big cities, but then there are smaller places like Salisbury's on the top 25. So that's good news to us because we're really interested in what are they called, the Big 12, the Big 12 largest school districts. I know that's also sports, but they call themselves the Big 12. That's great. We want everybody to have access, but we're really concerned about the small districts that don't have anything. And so many of these numbers are heavy in the rural districts. So you can see here 77% of the rural districts are participating, are accessing the materials. It's really difficult to get a measure of student achievement out of this work because it's so indirect. However, Math 1 EOC, we've seen some increases compared to what we would have expected prior to the work. Again, not ironclad, but suggests that it's having some kind of impact, I would say. This whole communication thing, and I'm terrible with Twitter, I'm not even on it, but that's okay, somebody else is, and they are all over it. We had a campaign for, like, every time you see high quality math instruction, snap a picture or tweet about it, which was really interesting to see sort of collectively people following that tag make sense of what good teaching looked like. Let's see. This is old, but sort of the briefs and the modules and the frameworks, all the things that have been created. This was heartening, actually. So Canvas was for high school, and we looked at the red down here at this makeshift dot plot, our rural districts, how many average page views per teacher. And so all of the rural districts are way up here, and then you can see the urban or green, sort of the Charlotte Meck, Guilford, Wake, and then the suburban ones, the sort of Union County, Johnston County, the ones sort of on the outside are yellow. So from this, it's like, if people know about it, they use it a lot because they don't have anything. It's still a challenge to just get the information out, but when they do, it's successful. And then this is sort of by county. I'm not going to show you another video unless you really want to watch it. No? Everybody's like, it's 4 o'clock, is it 4 o'clock? So I was going to give you a little bit of evidence of progress we're making in terms of building a shared vision of high quality math instruction in the state. And you might ask why that's important. Instructional vision is an idea that a profession has a different way of seeing a situation than non-professionals. So if you are an engineer and you walk under a deck, and you might see that really, really differently than I would see that, or an attorney. And so this idea of instructional vision is we see things differently as teachers than other people see, and the small details, the nuances of that actually are really important in terms of teaching and learning. And there's been some research about vision with pre-service teachers, with in-service teachers. It's related to their how much they grow in professional development. It's related to their kids' achievement. So it seems to be a really important marker of improvements in teaching. So we were interested, can we study that? All of the work has been interviews. It's kind of hard to interview across the state on a shoestring budget, so we've been working on developing a survey for it. It's in its third round, and we are now valid and reliable. And now we just have to do a confirmation study, which is really cool. It's going to be a tool that we can share with other states as they work on implementing something new. And it's divided. Vision is, there are many facets of it. 3 that we chose to work on are what's the teacher doing in instruction, the role of the teacher, what are they working on, mathematics tasks, and then what are students doing? Are they talking to one another? How's that working? And so this is the rubric we use, from just motivator, like cheerleader, you can do this, up to knowing when to interject when a kid is learning and when to not, to let them make an idea. Tasks from practicing procedures before applying concepts all the way up to actually trying to have some insights and to create a solution to a problem that they don't know how to do yet. And then discourse from traditional lecturing and sort of initiate, respond, evaluate sort of discourse patterns, up to kids driving the questions and kids driving the discourse in the class. In the first round, 2017, these are some of the practices that we asked them, which of this list would you most want to see in a classroom? So this is actually pretty good. So kids are working collaboratively, they're explaining things to one another, they're trying to make connections. Students have some authority to develop strategies and to decide whether that makes sense mathematically or not. In terms of the task, complex thinking, like we all think this is really important. And another thing about vision is it doesn't have to be what you enact. So it's sort of your ideal. It's aspirational, what I'm working towards. And then discourse, about 50% of people said they most want to see teachers asking conceptually oriented questions, encourage students to explain. So that was a really good sign. And what we learned from that is, as a state, we're kind of in a pretty good place in terms of what we think good teaching looks like. It's not mathematical, like sort of specific to math. And there's a whole body of literature that says it's not just asking conceptually oriented questions, it's asking those questions about a really important aspect of the kids' mathematics, for instance. But it was good. So in the second year, we gave it again and we actually changed the format so that we could actually move towards reliability and validity. But some of the things we saw the teachers most wanted to see, now we're at the 54% for kids discovering math, working as a mathematician would. Want to see the teacher providing time for students to collaborate and solve problems. We want to see the teacher encouraging students to explain to each other and how to solve problems. So it was a bump from the previous year. Not a big one, but it was a bump. Here's some stuff on tasks and discourse. It was all really good. The new survey data we closed last week, and anecdotally, it's even better than the year before. So we're really encouraged that we are making some progress in some shared understanding of what it means to teach math well for all kids to learn. So yeah, I think it's with people. I don't think it's with textbooks, and I don't think it's with tech tools. I think we've spent 50 years trying to build things that teachers can use to make this problem better. And I don't know. For the last 3 years, I've decided this is working not because of anything but the people. I mean, I've got teachers still calling on weekends. What can I do? That's unheard of. Like, who does that? And they want to be a part of something bigger that they see as making an impact. So, closing thoughts, I think we should invest in people and believe in people. Go ahead. Yeah.
And yet there were those documents that you said people really liked. It was like 2-page things that distill probably a lot of knowledge down into, so it can't be about people, it has to be about resources also, correct?
I would agree with you, except, yeah.
Tools to do things.
So I would agree with you, except there's a ton of research briefs out there. Everybody's got them. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has them. Everybody has them. They're shorter, better written, and they don't want them. I think they believe that people believe in them, and people are invested in them, and that's why they want them. I can't prove that. It's just my assessment of it. But yeah, poke holes, please. Makes it better.
So maybe I misunderstood. The ones that you showed were the ones that are created by the teachers for the teachers.
Correct. Or a university person and a teacher working together, and then vet them through teachers. So they're specific for North Carolina.
That's what I think the difference is.
We should just copy to other people's.
That's what's, I think that's a piece of it, though.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if it doesn't work for, like if it doesn't come from North Carolina, it doesn't work in North Carolina. There is some of that in districts, like this isn't for my students because of whatever reason. But I think it's more of it's belonging to a community, I think. I really do. Other questions? Go ahead.
What's being done to perpetuate the community idea, like as the community grows and people get brought into the community? It sounds like you've got a pretty cool
Yeah, it's a great question. So my colleague Allison McCullough at Charlotte has sort of taken the lead in pulling all of the things that we have, particularly on Canvas, closed down, and putting them on a website. So all of that's now publicly available without the discussion boards for pre-service teachers. So the idea is if your cooperating teacher is working with these materials, we want you prepared to do that. And so the two-page briefs, again, are really popular in pre-service world. So there's part of it is, hey, you're joining this large state community that's really close and well known across the country, and here are the resources that they're using, they developed for each other. And then I think the rest of it is the rest of it. In addition to the work of the professional organizations. And you all are great about having, bringing students into the profession well through NCCTM, the fall conference. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Others? So you're all really kind for Friday afternoon. Thank you. And I'll be here if you have any questions.
Thank you.